us today. Just got a little note there stating to let you all know that this meeting will be recorded and posted online at a later date. But my name is Joe Capper with SRF Consulting. I'm joined by my colleague Menno Schuking, and we represent the consultant team working with LAPC on a regional transit plan for La Crosse and its surrounding communities. We'll be giving an overview of the scope of our study today, and hopefully hearing from people here on the call to get some good input as we get underway here in some of the early stages of the project. Before we get into the details here, I just want to go over some of the logistics of how to use a Zoom webinar. I think a lot of us have become accustomed to using this as a tool for meeting with people, but just in case you're curious, and for the folks joining just by the phone, this might not be relevant, but if you are looking at a screen, take a look at the toolbar that should show up on the bottom of your screen. By default, we have everybody muted right now. That helps us manage any audio issues and people talking over each other. There'll be numerous opportunities for you to participate in the conversation. We definitely want to hear from you. And I'll go over a few different ways to do that. Your video is also turned off by default. Turn that on at your convenience. It's certainly not necessary. Us as panelists, we will have it on. Probably the two most important things are the Q&A function. So if you look in your toolbar, there should be a button for submitting questions. That is, if you want to submit a question that just the panelists can see, we will be monitoring that throughout the presentation and responding to you. And then there's also a chat function where if you'd like to post a question or comment publicly, or if someone wants to, that's not a panelist, provide a quick answer to a question that has been offered, we can certainly offer up the chat function as well. We will be doing some live polls throughout the presentation. That will be self-explanatory as it comes up. And then also, if you do have a question as we go, we encourage you to do that. I would say please use the Q&A function or the chat, or please just raise your hand. There's a function if you look under the participants tab, I believe. You can have the opportunity to raise your hand and be addressed by the group. We welcome that as well. So, and feel free to use the Q&A for troubleshooting or tech support. Menno and I will be alternating our presentation throughout here. So hopefully we can help you out if you are having issues with the Zoom or your connection. So with that, we can get into it. We don't want this to be 100% a lecture, but we do want to provide some information to everyone on the project here and where we're at and what we're doing. So first, we'll give an overview of what is in our scope of work as the consultant team, give a quick overview of existing services in the region. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with some of the transit services that operate, but we certainly want to let you know what the existing conditions are and what the scope of our project is. We'll give you a little bit about what goes into transit service planning and what we'll be doing for our technical part of this project. We'll be giving you an update on some of our public engagement strategies. This virtual open house, as well as future open houses, are going to be a part of that. And then we have some discussion topics where we'd like to hear from you. Again, some of that will be done by live polling and surveys. And then we will open up the floor to provide some comments that we'll be recording here in this meeting. So very briefly, what is a transit development plan? Why are we doing it? How do we get from point A to point B here? What we're working on is to develop a 10-year plan to guide regional transit services and future investments. We want to understand what current and future needs are for public transportation in the region, and we want to provide some solid recommendations on how we can grow that service and meet needs sustainably. So we're doing this really in 4 major phases of the project. One is collecting a lot of data from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, from the transit providers to assess transit system performance. We're looking at service both before and during the pandemic to understand really what are the core services that are being provided, how are they consumed. We'll be doing a lot of public engagement. That is something we're continuing to evaluate as we go. We're doing a lot of things virtually and at a distance, largely to make sure that we're being mindful of public health rules and doing things safely. There's a lot that we can do virtually, but we'll also be doing having some in-person opportunities throughout the project. And then once we've understood what those needs are and what the overall goals are of the project, we'll be developing recommendations and some different service planning scenarios. This can include recommendations about how to better coordinate services between rural and urban, route changes to the La Crosse MTU system in terms of routes, stops, etc. And then we're also going to be looking at whittling that down to a preferred set of scenarios that eventually will be adopted in a long-range planning document. So to give a quick overview of current services, I will turn the presentation over to my colleague Menno, who will give you an update on some of the current things we've been assessing and some things we're working on right now.
Thank you, Joe. We will be looking at the 3 public transit providers in the La Crosse region for this regional transit development plan. We also know that there are a couple health and human service providers that offer specialized transit services in the region, and we will make sure to document those services in the plan, but the majority of our plan will be focused on the public transit services offered by La Crosse MTU, the Onalaska Shared Ride, and the Smart Bus service. So the La Crosse MTU service serves the cities of La Crosse, La Crescent, French Island, Onalaska, and the town of Campbell. And they have 9 fixed routes in service. So that's your regular public transit bus that arrives every hour or every 30 minutes along a dedicated route with bus stops on street corners, for example. They also operate 1 circular route in the downtown area that operates in 2 opposite directions to connect destinations in and near downtown La Crosse. And then as a fixed route provider, MTU also offers complimentary paratransit service for people who may experience some mobility disabilities. And then on the weekends, they have a Safe Ride program in the late night hours on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night to connect downtown with the university and colleges in the city. MTU operates 7 days a week, and in 2019, so pre-pandemic, the ridership was 923,000, so just under a million riders. That ridership, broken down by their fixed routes, shows up like this. So this graph shows average weekday ridership by route. And you can see that the routes 1 through 6, which mainly operate within the city of La Crosse, have the highest ridership, while some of the routes that operate to the partner communities on contracted service have lower ridership. But some of those routes also have lower ridership just simply because those routes don't operate as often. They operate more limited, not always on the weekend, or not as late at night or during the day, offer lower frequencies than the 6 main routes of the system. And to normalize for that, for the level of service provided for each route, we look at some transit performance measures. And one of the transit performance measures that we look at is ridership per revenue hour or service hour. So basically the number of hours that the buses are available on the street. But even when normalizing for the amount of service provided for each route, you see that the first 6 routes still perform very, very well. And that's aligns with what we know about well-used transit services, is that if it's frequent, if it's offered during a wide span of service during the day and on the weekends, that if your transit is available and reliable and frequent, that more people will ride it than a bus that only operates a few times during the day or a few times per week. So. The other service that we'll be looking at is the Onalaska Shared Ride Service. This is a demand response service. So that means that to book a ride, you call a phone number and they will pick you up from curb. They provide curb to curb service within any destination within the cities of Onalaska, Holmen, and West Salem. Just like MTU, they operate 7 days a week from 6:30 in the morning till 7 in the evening, so slightly shorter service hours than MTU. And in 2019, their ridership was 54,000. So that's about 6-7% of the ridership of MTU. And then the final provider we'll be looking at for this transit development plan is the Scenic Mississippi Regional Transit, or the Smart Bus. They offer a fixed route, regular service, daily service with 3 or 4 trips per day from Prairie du Chien, Viroqua, and Tomah to and from the city of La Crosse. And that service in 2019 transferred operations and ownership to La Crosse County. And then I'll hand it back to Joe to get some transit service planning 101.
A little bit of planning 101, and we can answer, we could take a long time on this, so I'm going to elect not to, but what my goal here is to give a little bit of an overview of the technical process. If you have questions about this, feel free to put that in the Q&A, or we can discuss it later. There are several things that we look at when we are doing a transit plan like this to assess the market for service, or the environment in which transit service operates, to really determine, is the amount and type of transit service appropriate for a given area. So we look at things like population and employment density. Often if those two are reach a critical mass together, we look at the locations of zero vehicle households, and this is all data that's largely pulled from the census or other similar census derived data sources. So those households that don't have a reliable access to a personal vehicle, we know that that's a major indicator for transit usage. We know that students, higher education level students, college students, have a higher propensity to use transit. So we want to know student housing locations. We look at the sidewalk network. We also want to consider factors related to equity. We want to know those populations that have been historically transportation disadvantaged, that we can ensure good opportunity in whatever recommendations we put together. Additionally, we look at traffic operations in the roadway network. Is it physically possible or a good idea to run transit in a location? And then also current and future land use, and getting a handle on where development is happening. Then when we look at different service options, we really do look at everything that is out there. I know Menno gave an overview of the existing public transit services that are out there, but we also know that there are human service transportation providers, private providers, that all make up part of the network of transportation services. And we're also doing this at a time when technology is moving very quickly. So a lot of app-based services, different types of technologies that are customer facing that transit agencies can use, things that are like app-based micro transit services, and even bike share and scooters, we know are part of the network. So we are looking at all the different options, and we have a familiarity with planning for all of these different options when we put a plan together. Then we look at, when we're making changes and evaluating the existing service, we look at segments of routes that maybe are not performing very well. We want to minimize redundancy, make sure service is well coordinated, and that we're not duplicating resources that are put out there on the street. We want to simplify services, make them easy to use, make them legible, so that we can promote access to transit services. We improve directness, so that is simply we want to minimize the amount of turns that a bus makes, because turns usually equals more travel time, less legibility, and less convenience. And then we also want to look at opportunities to increase frequency. So making sure that buses will come by a given stop as often as possible. So just some examples here. We have been able to pull some data on La Crosse MTU, for example, of where some of the lower performing segments of routes or where there is not a ton of ridership. We look at that to understand where the high activity is on routes. So if you look at the pink or light red portions of this map, those are areas where you have less than one boarding a day. And we look at, is there a way to reallocate those sources to a place where we know there's higher demand, perhaps in the core service areas or some of the more productive corridors in the city. We also want to look at minimizing redundancy of service. So if there are multiple buses that operate on a given corridor, sometimes that can be good because that corridor represents a major destination. We're bringing people from a lot of places there, but it also might be an area where we can expand geographic coverage by moving certain routes off a given corridor. We also want to make sure that routes are simplified and easy to read. Looking at things like loops that only go in one direction. If those do exist, we want to make sure that they occur at in a way that doesn't penalize the rider for travel time and can be done reliably. There's the question of directness. How many turns does a route make? Is there a way that we can minimize that so that we can have bi-directional service in a given area? And then, of course, increasing frequency, where we want to look at identifying areas where we can enhance service, make capital improvements, and make sure that people have a usable, effective transit service. So with that, I will turn it back to Menno, who will talk a little bit about our public engagement strategies.
But before we do that, we had one question in the Q&A. There was one question: are low use stops due to previous route changes? So that refers to the map that shows the ridership by stop. Well, the high ridership stops are usually near major destinations where a lot of destinations that people want to go to are within walking distance, but a lot of low use stops could be because the route doesn't operate as often, or it might travel through a lower density residential area where people might only board once per day or maybe only once a week. And some areas are less pedestrian friendly, or sometimes the bus needs to travel through a less than ideal transit route to reach a destination that is important for transit users. But Joe, if you want to add on to it.
Yeah, just add a little bit. I think, Menno, you gave a good overview of why things where you see high boarding activity versus low boarding activity. And I would just add that one of the things that we are also doing, and we're kind of in the midst of our data analysis right now, is looking at past plans and past recommendations to understand what was successful and where there's room for improvement. So certainly if there is an instance of a route change that hasn't yielded productive results, that's definitely something that we will be looking into. And I think that is the last question that we have.
Right now, for now, yeah, but please continue adding questions in the Q&A or in the chat function. So, the public engagement portion of this plan. So as we've shared a couple data points already, so both from a transit performance standpoint and from looking at certain populations through census data and through employment data, for example. But we want to make sure that all the data we look at and is backed up, or we want to truth it basically with reaching out to the public and make sure that we're not just looking at data, but also at the stories and the experiences of people who interact with transit on a day-to-day basis. So this transit development plan, we want to reach out to as many people as possible that ride and don't ride the current the three public transit systems, And we hope that this provides both an educational opportunity to learn more about the three transit systems, as well as an opportunity to provide input for us to learn, okay, where would you like to see improved service? What areas of town would you like service to be added to? What problems have you encountered in the past using transit? And we will use that in this first needs assessment phase to summarize all the issues with transit in the community. And then we will use that input to shape recommendations, shape alternative service scenarios. And then once we come up with some different alternatives for bus service or policy changes, we want to go back to the public later in the project to make sure that our recommendations make sense and fulfill or align with the needs that were identified early on in the project. So to learn more about the project, there is a project website on the La Crosse MPO website, which will be updated throughout the plan. We will post all public engagement opportunities on the website, as well as publish the slides from meetings and presentations such as this one, as well as webinar recordings on the website, as well as deliverables, so documents, draft documents that we will be developing as part of this plan. So for the initial needs assessment portion of the project, we have this spring public engagement list. So we initially started off with interviews and small group discussions with groups of stakeholders. And we are launching today the community survey and wiki map. This is an interactive map where you can drop points on a map or draw lines on a map to identify specific areas of town that you would like to see transit service improvements or in the region for the smart bus. Today we're doing the virtual open house. And then we also recognize that while during COVID, a lot of public engagement activities have moved online, we know that not everybody has access to the internet or a smartphone or reliable internet or a laptop to participate in such meetings. So we also want to meet people where they're at, transit riders and non-transit riders. So we intend to have a table set up at the transit station in downtown La Crosse with some informational boards and activities and some more information about the project. So more people learn about the project and have an opportunity for input as to what they would like to see in the future for transit in the regions. The community survey is online as of today. It's online and a paper instrument. So there's a SurveyMonkey link here on the screen, as well as a QR code you can scan with your phone. And the community survey asks both riders and non-riders some questions about transit. So from riders, we want to know about their current transit use, what they use transit for, how long it takes to travel, their experiences, and preferences for improvement. And then from non-riders, we want to hear about what is preventing you from riding transit. And then we have a couple demographic and socioeconomic questions on the survey, and it's available as of today, and we will keep the survey open through mid-June. And we will, especially starting after the holiday weekend, we will start advertising the survey online and through partners. And we will ask you to hopefully share the link with your friends and colleagues as well. So, alongside the community survey, we have an online comment map or a wiki map. And on this map, you can pan around, you can zoom in, zoom out, and you can put comments on the map regarding transit service, areas where you've encountered issues or maybe unsafe situations, or maybe areas that you really appreciate seeing transit being served, or certain destination that you frequently go to. And with this link as well as online as of today, we hope that you'll be able to share that as well with your friends and colleagues. So.
I can just put in a plug for this. It's a really helpful tool for us. If you do have an interest in providing comments on where you think a shelter might need to go, an unsafe pedestrian crossing, or just drawing a bus route that you'd like to see, it's a powerful tool, and I encourage you all to go to the link. Again, this will be posted on the project website with a link to the Wikimap, and we would very much value your input here.
Okay, before we continue to the discussion section, I see we have 2 questions in the Q&A.
Yep.
The first question is, does the La Crosse Regional Transit Development Plan want to see the roads widen through the marsh? Joe, do you want to do that one?
I can definitely take that one. So I will say that the scope of our project is focused on public transportation. So largely the bus and other public transit services that are operating in La Crosse. We are not looking at any type of facility changes generally related to roadways, with the exception of some type of potential transit facility. I don't have an answer to the question because I'm not quite sure. It doesn't really relate to our project. That can certainly, that question just might need to be directed elsewhere, but that is not a part of any sort of road widening project, is not part of this plan, except for to the extent that we want to pay attention to other construction projects as they're occurring. Another question we got from Obi King, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but what year was your ridership data gathered? 2020 is not a very representative year. We agree. That's why we are looking predominantly at data going up to 2019. So we do believe that pre-pandemic ridership information is probably the most accurate picture when we're looking at strengths and weaknesses in the system. I will say we are also looking at ridership during 2020 for other types of analysis, because there were still people using public transportation for essential trips. And for us as planners, it's very interesting to see what those pandemic ridership patterns were and how the system was oriented at that time. So very good comment. We are cognizant that 2020 was an odd year for transit ridership nationwide. One other comment from Francis Lee Edwards, that the online comment map looks good. Thanks for sharing. Well, thank you. We hope it works very well. Please go mark it up as much as you want. And I believe we also have a question or comment in the chat, just from Jackie confirming what I said. Thank you, Jackie Eastwood from LAPC. The road through the marsh is not in the scope of this plan. So I guess we'll just have to direct your comments and questions elsewhere for that. So at this time, before we get into some of the discussion questions, I would like to open up the floor. We just gave you a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions or general comments for us right now? Feel free to submit something into the Q&A, into the chat, or raise your hand, and we can make sure you get unmuted so that you can participate here before we get into the next part of our open house. I'll wait like 30 seconds.
See,
hey,
one hand.
A hand raised from Kathy Friedhoff. Kathy, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself now. So thank you.
I believe you're able to unmute. Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. We should be able to hear you now.
Okay, my question is, what is the cutoff for the number of riders before a before a change is made in a route or time is made in a route.
So Kathy, that means, are you referring to like at what point, what's a minimum level of ridership that like,
Or maximum number of riders before. Because some, there's a time where I go consistently every week,
Mhm.
and I get concerned when you start talking about numbers of riders, because I don't want what I do consistently every week during good weather for that to change.
Mhm. So thank you for your question, Kathy. Just to respond to that, we look at, so in terms of like a minimum or maximum level of ridership, there are certain benchmarks that we would use for like what's appropriate to run a large fixed route bus and what is appropriate for something like Onalaska Shared Ride Taxi. They're useful in two different environments. So a couple things. Number one, yes, we are looking at numbers. We're looking at ridership patterns and productivity and passenger loads on buses. We want to know if a bus is too crowded. For example, we would want to make sure that we're having an adequate investment there. But we also want to look beyond those numbers. So that's why we're having meetings like this, because we want to understand if there is a critical need to maintain service to a location or access, that we're still doing that. Even if there might be a low ridership area, it might fulfill a very important need in the community. There's a large cost to a trip that is not taken as well, or someone that's not able to make it to a doctor's appointment or something like that. So we want to be cognizant not just of those productivity numbers, but also hearing through the surveys and hearing from regular riders like you, Kathy, where some of those important needs are. So as we're going through that, please, provide comments, take the survey, let us know what's important to you. And also, no recommendations are going to be carried forward without a public process. So please stay tuned in the project and what we will be looking at as well. I guess I can move to one more question in our Q&A from Francis Lee Edwards. Whenever I see buses on LOSI, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, they always look empty. How does a transit system justify using large buses? So much like you build a roadway to operate for its maximum capacity, or you build a parking lot to work at its maximum capacity, we typically use vehicles that can accommodate the highest ridership that we can expect on a route. And if you're typically buses are more full in a downtown core area as they approach their transfer center, and in outlying areas they can be more empty because they've concluded their route. So what I would say is that in transit, we plan our routes and we purchase our fleets based on the peak capacity, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're running too small of a vehicle that can't handle a certain level of ridership. The other thing I will say is that a reason why a transit system may use one type of bus or one type of fleet is that there is a cost savings to having consistency in your fleet. And ultimately, the highest cost of providing transit service is the driver. And that's a fixed, well, I guess it's variable to an extent, but that's a fixed cost no matter what type of vehicle you're providing. It's the labor and the maintenance and everything, and that can offset the fuel cost. So there are savings that a transit agency can obtain by having a consistent fleet number and for planning for its maximum capacity. But that being said, that is why we are looking at some of the ridership patterns, where if there is truly an area where transit is not used, we're going to be looking into that. I think Jackie had a comment here just saying that we look at passenger loads as well for our ridership analysis. And then one question from Diane Bone. Are you also talking to businesses that might want to partner with transit services for their employees or patrons, theaters, concerts, etc.? And so that is yes. We are conducting stakeholder interviews. We're hoping to meet with people in the business community. There are many successful models for that in the state of Wisconsin where employers provide support for transit service. So yes, that is definitely something we'll be looking into for part of this project. And if you happen to have a connection for us, please let us know. We'll have our contact information toward the end of the presentation. So, and we just have a few comments in the chats, and I don't think those are necessarily some questions directed at us. But thank you for that. I guess we'll open up the floor. Are there any other hands raised right now?
Don't see any.
Don't see anything. Oh, it looks
I see
like
one.
Kathy does. All right,
Yeah.
Kathy, I will give you the ability to unmute yourself here.
I just wanted to, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but like when you were talking about the Onalaska Home in West Salem shared ride taxi service, they do connect with the MTU. And so I think you're also looking at those connections among and between SMART, Onalaska, Home in West Salem, Amtrak, Airport, and that might affect route suggestions and frequency and stuff like that. And I'm thinking of it mostly because Woodman's supermarket is on a really weirdo, very limited route, and not accessible on weekends or most of the day. And I'm not even sure if the Onalaska West Salem goes there or not, because I don't know what's in what municipality or township. So anyway, if you could just clarify that a little bit or talk a little bit about those connections that you're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, that is something that we are looking at on this project, is the connections among those different agencies. And yes, you can make transfers from the Onalaska services, the on-demand services, to La Crosse MTU, and understanding how to make those better, coordinate the services, make them easier to use, and we're aware of some newer destinations and other places and that might want to be served by transit. So yes, I think, thank you, Kathy. That is something we are paying attention to in the project. Go ahead, Menno.
To add one thing, we understand like the transit agencies have their own service areas, and we want to improve the coordination between the transit providers, because we know that customers, you don't think about a city or county boundary or a state boundary even when you make your transportation decisions or where you need to travel to. So trying to remove those boundaries as barriers in transportation is one thing we hope to address somewhat in this plan. So, and to improve the connections to the other services. So thanks, Kathy.
And Jackie just provided another comment in the Q&A that the Onalaska shared ride service does go to Woodman's, but transfers only occur at Valley View and Center 90. So some local specifics there.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't see any other hands raised. I don't see anything else in the Q&A. I think we're good on the chat. So with that, we have a few discussion prompts here, and then some little polling exercises that normally if we were in person, we would do probably using dots or a tabletop exercise, but thankfully we have some tools here on Zoom that we can use. And really what we're asking of folks right now is stuff to help us inform the overall goals of the project, because ultimately when we come up with recommendations, we want to be able to point back to something that we heard at the beginning of the project, that we're making sure we are addressing a locally driven need. So Oh, we just did that part. So with that, we're going to ask a few questions that there is no wrong answer, I will say, but they are going to ask about trade-offs. And if there is an opportunity to make an increased investment in public transportation, and you had to prioritize one thing over the other, we're going to ask you through a live poll that will pop up on your screen what your preference would be. And this will help us, when we get to this preferred alternative, help do a phased plan that we know the community is behind, that we know elected officials can get behind, and also know what we think, to also help us understand what's most important to the community. So again, there is no wrong answer. We're going to make recommendations that address all of these things, but given a choice, the first question we're asking you is, would you like to take the bus to more places you can't get to today, so serve new destinations, or make investments in more frequency? So having the bus come more often, or have to wait for the bus at a lower time. So we'll wait for these answers to come in. I see we have 14 out of 25 participants voting. I know some people might not vote because we have some staff reps in the open house that have already voted on this. But we'll give it a few minutes just until the answers stop rolling in before we share the results. And we have a handful more questions just like this.
All right, I'll give you a few more seconds. This is interesting, but all right, I'll end this first poll and I'll share the results.
Making it hard for us.
You split down the middle, so half of you
between frequency and serving new destinations. Totally cool. We will we'll open the floor up for some further discussion a little bit later too, but for now we can go to the next question, which asks, would you rather walk a longer distance to better transit service? So let's say that there's a certain corridor where we know that the bus is going to run in every 5 minutes, have really good waiting areas, good facilities, and you would walk a longer or roll a longer distance to that bus stop location? Or would you rather have a longer trip that might take you to the front door of your destination?
poll should be up on your screen right now. All right, we'll leave it open for about 5 more seconds.
We do have a couple of, while we're doing this, we have a couple of comments in the chat here. Patrick asked what he's supposed to do with the map on the survey. So that's great. If someone is already clicking on the links or found our wiki map, there are some instructions to do that. I would just encourage you to contact us after that. We can walk you through some of the details there. Another one, Kathy, I feel there's not enough information to choose one over the other. I hear you. This is kind of just a thought exercise, knowing what you know about the transit system and understanding what your priorities might be. Don't worry too much about what your response is, just thinking about what improvements you would make. And then we're going to have a lot more detailed information later on in the project when we actually develop recommendations. So again, this one is tied as well. This is, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I hadn't hit the share button yet.
Sorry. Well, it's tied again. Again, this is very, very interesting, but we'll perhaps get some more, some different responses here, but that's, again, it's challenging, but maybe interesting for us. The next question, again, looks at serving more destinations. So take the bus to a place that you can't go today, or so expanding routes, serving new destinations, or putting more hours of service. So having the bus run later in the evening or earlier in the morning. see if we can do another one that's tied.
And Joe, there is one question in the Q&A. I don't know if
Yes,
you-
yeah, I see. I think I will get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's a good discussion point. We'll do it. I will. Thank you, Kevin, for your question. I'll respond to that in a little bit.
Okay. We'll give it 5 more seconds for this poll. All right, and I'll share the
All right,
results.
so now we have a little bit of a different split. Again, pretty close though, 12-7, not insignificant, but a few more people responded that they'd like a longer span of the transit service day to operate later in the evening or earlier in the morning. Okay. Next question is looking at that same question of span of service, but now asking to choose between that and adding frequency. So would you rather wait for the bus half the time you do today? And if you're not a regular rider, you can answer as though on behalf of someone you know who rides the service, or what you would imagine you prefer. Or would you rather have the service day run later in the evening? So higher frequency, going from a bus running every 60 minutes to every 30 minutes, 30 to 15, or running earlier or later in the day. Another
Yeah. Another
15.
5 seconds. Yeah.
Still some responses coming in.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to close this poll and share the results.
A few more votes for increasing the span of service. And again, I wanted to say we will, ideally you do both, but it's just we're trying to get a sense of priorities and what is most useful here. Next question is looking at weekday service versus Saturday service. If you had the opportunity to make an additional investment in transit, would you add more service on weekdays or more service on Saturdays?
All right. I'll give it 5 more seconds. And end this one and share the results.
Right, and now looking like a few more votes for additional Saturday service. Next question, very similar, but now we're asking weekday service versus Sunday service. Have different a little bit of different characteristics on Sundays than Saturdays. Responses coming in rapidly. Don't have to think as much about it, I guess. So.
Most people have voted. I'll give it 5 more seconds. All right. I'll share these results.
Go for it.
So a small preference for adding Sunday service over weekday service.
And now if you could predict this one, Saturday versus Sunday.
All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds. in this one and share results. And there's a preference for Saturday service improvements over Sunday service improvements.
So now I guess what I will do is I'm going to give an overview of the next steps of our project. And I think what we'll do after this is then open the floor for general questions and feedback. Anything we discussed today, we really want to know what we should prioritize as your technicians on this project to help make the project successful. So what we will be doing is we're still in this needs assessment phase of the project. Like I said, we're collecting a lot of data. We're meeting with people to understand what the critical needs are for transit in the region. We'll take that information that we will use to then set goals, project priorities, and various performance measures. And then we get into, you know, the dense part of the project, which is looking at developing service recommendations, policy recommendations, everything that we can react to those goals to make sure we have good outcomes here. We will be doing continued public engagement throughout the project, both online and in person. Again, I encourage you to take the survey that has gone live, as well as have fun playing with the Wikimap. If you do have questions about that, our contact information is here. You can also find that at the project website. This is a project that's led by LAPC, but here at SRF, we are your consultant team working on it. I'm the PM, Menno's my right hand, handling a lot of the details on the project. Avon Moore is also someone that will be helping us out throughout the project. She's not on this meeting today, but this is our contact information. So with that, I want to just come back to a couple of questions on that we got in the Q&A, or one specifically from Kevin. 2 blocks seems to be the critical distance that people are willing to walk. I don't know if that's accurate statistically though. Yes, walking distance to a bus stop is something that we look at. There are rules of thumb out there that say the average that someone would walk to a bus stop is about a 1/4 mile. But that doesn't necessarily take into account how pleasant that walk is. You know, what is the sidewalk network like? What's the terrain like? And then what is the quality of service that they're walking to? We know that people will walk a longer distance to better service. So that's something that's pretty statistically proven out. So, and it totally varies by community and climate and everything. So that's part of why we look beyond the numbers and we try to meet with people and understand what works in La Crosse, because it's not necessarily going to be a carbon copy of what works everywhere else. Thank you for your comment, Jackie, that you'd like more frequency later in the evening. So we'll, again, we're looking for we're looking for trade-offs.
Yeah, and it also could include like shelter amenities, or MTU has a bus tracking app, for example, so you know when the bus is coming. So having some comfort in knowing what you're walking to kind of helps whether you're willing to make the walk, but it's all context sensitive for all the questions that we've asked so far in the trade-offs based on the location of where the bus might go past. So we have a couple comments in the chat. Thanks for the information and opportunity to express priorities, says Jill Billings. So thank you for attending this evening. Diane, sorry?
I just said you're welcome.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do it.
Diane says that she loves the app and the addition of the circulator service. And then Kathy is promoting an event for the La Crosse area transit advocates for a meeting. So, and it looks like Kathy would also like to add bike racks at bus stops.
I think Jackie just has another comment here in the Q&A. Jackie East was just saying that even with the tools that are out there, she still goes out to the stop early because you never know how hard it will be to cross Losi. And that's, you know, that's something that we take into account as well, is the pedestrian environment and how easy it is to cross places. And that's the kind of stuff that would be a great thing to flag on the wiki map so we know where some of those challenging spaces are. So,
Anyone? Oh, I see one raised hand from Kathy, so I will unmute you. I think you should already have the ability to unmute yourself.
Oh.
Okay, yep, there you go.
It took me a while to click into you. That's why I was a little late.
no, it's okay.
Getting into this meeting. How do I find you to answer these surveys and everything? Because I would have done it a lot more quickly had I been able to find you.
Well, so Kathy, don't worry about it. You didn't miss out. I think if there are other opportunities to participate. We ask a lot of the similar questions in the survey. So if you go to the online survey that is posted on the project website, which Menno, I don't know if you have it handy. I probably have it the most handy. I will post that link in the chat for the project website where you can follow along and participate that way.
Okay, I'll write that down so that I can do the surveys and things too.
I'll put it in the chat
That's
right now.
Oh, Menno beat me to it. There you go. So if you click on the link in the chat, bookmark that. That's where you can get.
And the community survey will be open for a few weeks through mid-June. So you don't have to complete it tonight. If you want to complete it after the holiday weekend, you can fill it out next
So
week.
on whose website will this be though, so I can go to it?
Yeah, so there's a link in the chat. I will also I can email you after the meeting today or early next week to send you the
That'd
link.
be great.
Yeah, just email. You can email any of us that are. Yeah, email Menno
Right here. Okay.
That works. We do have a couple of
Thank
questions here. Thank you for participating. A couple of questions in the Q&A. So from Francis, how is it that this development plan was established and where will the funding come from or has it come from? Is there a specific amount of money that is already present to work with? Is exciting, yet were the initial goals or questions before, were there initial goals or questions before it was established? What were the issues you are dealing with? And I may have Jackie Eastwood, one of my colleagues here, to chime in. But for future funding, so there are various state and federal grants and local funding available that go into public transit. So anything at a baseline, anything that we recommend will likely be funded by those sources. Additionally, there are competitive grants for pilot projects or opportunities for private investment as well that can be looked at to support transit service. I just want to make sure, and Francis, I might have you unmute yourself just so we can talk. If your question is about whether where the funding came for this plan or where the funding will come from for the recommendations that come out of the plan, just to make sure I'm clear here. And as far as developing the scope, a transit development plan is something that a metropolitan planning organization, so any urban area in the country, has to go through some type of transit planning exercise at least every 5 years at a minimum. So this is something that every region goes through, and I think there were some things that we definitely wanted to specifically take a look at for this plan regarding coordination among transit providers, having it be regional in scope, which I think that's why some consulting assistance was pulled in. And we are looking to respond to goals here and set and put a set of goals that are set forth here as well. That would, I guess, but before that, I would say that there are local long-range transportation plans, comprehensive plans, other documents that we are looking at to better understand the setting so that we're building on work that's already been completed. So I will Francis, Menno, if you can unmute, just give Francis the opportunity to unmute. We can I'll keep going through the questions, and then if I didn't answer that correctly, please let me know.
Thanks, Joseph. I was just wondering, if you already had any, if you know of these monies that are available that you can apply for, which is a really good thing. If there were certain things, since you've been in the business for quite some time, what are some of the goals that you would like to see taken care of? What are some of the issues that you're facing that you would like to have responded to or corrected, in addition to asking the community, which is very valuable for what is needed? What do you see some of the needs to be, and do you think that there will be funding for it?
Well, we are still, I guess, I don't have a fully formed opinion on that just yet, I guess. As far as, as the consultant team, what we want to see as technical experts or what we would recommend. I think there are, I guess, one thing off the top of my head that I can speak to, that, because we work predominantly in the upper Midwest, but nationwide, and a lot of communities doing similar projects like this. And I think what we've seen, and I don't know whether this is a phenomenon that has occurred in La Crosse specifically, but over time, as communities grow geographically and population wise, but routes get stretched to the point where people have to spend a lot of time on buses, or just to get to the grocery store, you're making 2 transfers, or it's just a very lengthy trip, and it's not really practical or useful for people. So, our focus is, at the end of the day, we want to make sure whatever we're recommending is easy and convenient to use. And sometimes that takes additional investment. In a lot of cases, it does. But focusing on those transportation corridors where we know transit can be successful, and then looking at some of those newer modes of transportation, whether it's leveraging some of the shared ride services or demand response services, to make sure that we're covering newer developing outlying areas, but making good investments in our more mature parts of town where it's very walkable. We know there's a stable market for service. I would say that I always go into a project kind of looking for that, but beyond that, we're getting to know the community and still trying to understand some of the dynamics of the service before I can say, well, this is definitely what La Crosse needs at this point. It's early in the project.
That's fair. I understand that. That's fair. So kind of what you're saying is that it's not as big of a challenge to you as, say, the higher population areas that have more diversity.
I would not say that. I think it's maybe there's some less, like, compared to work. So we're based in Minneapolis, but compared to doing work here, it's just a different scale, but it's the same planning principles at hand.
Okay.
I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the question. Menno, go ahead.
I would just like to add, like, as we work on developing recommendations, we will work on recommendations and priorities both within the existing budgets, but if more federal, state, or local money does become available, we do want to have a list of projects or services ready to go for, okay, if more money were to become available, this would be the first thing that we would implement in La Crosse. And that's both from operations, so where the bus runs and how often it runs and when it runs, as well as some capital improvements, so physical, so buses, shelters, or maybe improvements to the garage or transit center.
So a couple of other questions in the Q&A. Obi King has asked, is there a virtual handout with the links and resources that you've been referencing? If not, we can easily make one and have that sent out to people that have participated. Menno, go ahead.
So we will add the slides of this presentation to the website shortly. It might not be up yet by tomorrow, but hopefully early next week we will have it on the website. And there will be the links in there as well as the links to the community survey and the Wikimap. And the project website will be updated throughout the project, and eventually also some documents that we will be developing. So the big needs assessment document, for example, will be uploaded to the project website.
One question here from Abby. I live in the town of Campbell, north end of French Island. There are many stops by the airport, but not many stops within the town limits on Lakeshore Drive north of I-90. Is an on-demand option available for areas like this that lack regular ridership, but it's still needed in the community? I think, Abby, you identified something we'll definitely look into for this project. I mean, that is a use case that we definitely want to provide some recommendations and options for. So, looking at an area where, Abby, you might be aware that there might not be a critical mass of people for regular all-day ridership, but still people there that critically that have that need for transportation. We'll want to develop a solution for that. So thank you for that very good comment. Question from Diane. The previous transit plan that was out on the MTU website until recently, I think it was a 10 or 15-year plan. Do we ever find out how those aspirations were achieved or not? That is something that we're doing as part of our initial needs assessment phases, looking at past plans, what was successfully implemented, what was not, and also understanding how those coordinate with other plans. So I don't have a detailed answer for you, but that will be part of our first deliverable, first needs assessment document that will eventually be posted on the website. Jackie also noted that illustrative projects are good. We can get those in our transportation improvement program if merited. So just looking at, in addition to putting a detailed funding plan out, that the planning organization can put illustrative projects in their planning documents to make sure that things are documented as a need, ready to go. And if funding should come to fruition later on, those projects, you can point to something in a long range plan that says that this is necessary and something that we want to do. So we want to be mindful of a long range vision, but also be practical in what we develop. Jackie also mentioned that Route 7 is a deviated fixed route and you can request a flag stop. So that is a method of on-demand service.
Yeah, that's for the French Island.
Yes, thank you for French Island. So that is specific. So feel free to consult some of the resources on MTU website or reach out to us if you have questions about that. Question from Kathy. Will your recommendations include policy and budget changes entities can consider for enhanced services? Will you include case studies or examples from other communities? The first part of your question, the answer to that is yes. To the extent that they're necessary, we will include peer case studies. Often that's where we get a lot of our ideas and recommendations are from our portfolio of experience. So if there is something that we do believe, hey, this would be a really good idea for the La Crosse region, we can make sure that is applied. Jim also just thank you, Jim, for chiming in. There is currently a demand response service on all of the French Island routes. So thank you for making that clarification. And this is also a good opportunity to build some awareness of the services that are out there. So thank you, Jim. All right, do we see any other hands raised? I don't think I do. I guess we'll make this a last call for questions or comments. Feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat for Q&A. All right, well, as I conclude here, feel free to do any of those things, but I want to thank everyone for participating today. This was some really great conversation. So I look forward to continuing the dialogue with members of the community here as we go through the rest of the project, which our technical work is going to take us through about October. Hopefully getting this plan adopted by the MPO by the end of the year. So thank you again. Please feel free to, you have our contact information here. Check out the website that Menno has posted links to in the chat. We have a lot of good engagement tools where you can continue the conversation virtually. And with that, thank you. Have a great evening and enjoy your holiday weekend, everybody.